What up, Wizards? It's Dev. Mtg, we like it in Magic, and today I got a deck you can sink your teeth into. Wait, hold on a minute, though. This shirt is probably not going to work. I didn't have a vampire shirt, so I asked Brittany for one of her shirts, and now I'm currently stretching it out. So can we maybe get something a little more... It doesn't have to have a vampire on it, just a little more subtle that doesn't show so much arm meat and nipple. Can we do that? Hold on. All right, that feels better already. What did we end up with? Batman. I don't get it. But anyway, today we're going to do a deck you can really sink your teeth into. Well, I've already done that joke. All right, how about this? A deck with fangs. Yeah, I guess that works. Now, I can't use either one of those jokes for the werewolves deck when we finally get around to it. But I probably will. Anyway, we're going to do a deck a lot of people have asked us to do. It's Rakdos Vampires. And if you expected like a whole intro where I'm a vampire or something, I'm sorry. We just don't have that in the budget. Plus, I'm not the vampire around here. Don't sing if you want to live long. They have no use for your song. You're dead, you're dead, you're dead. You're dead and out of this world. Hey, we're back. You will like and subscribe. Is that a thing that vampires can do? You'll like and subscribe. We'll see if that worked on anybody. But you can also do any of this that might interest you down there. If you want to vote on content here on the channel, that's why you're watching vampires. You can do it there on the Patreon. $1 a month is all it takes. Heck of a deal. If you want to see me play Magic pretty poorly, you can do it at that web address. But I want to go ahead and start talking about this deck because there's like a lot more to talk about than I thought there would be. I agonized over multiple decisions making this deck, and in the end, it really did suck the life out of me. That said, some of the decisions you have to make when building this deck are easier than sucking blood from a baby. Like you play 4 copies of Falcon Wrath Pitfighter. This is a champion 1-drop, but it's a little shy. She won't tell me where she goes all night. She insists that she can't talk about it. Aggro decks like this need both a Savannah Alliance in the early game, as well as some way to draw or filter cards in the late game, and this does both of those things, so even if it only ever really sacrifices itself, like seriously 85% of the time, then it's still more than good enough to go in our deck, and it has the right creature type. So, yeah. We're also running a playset of Vampire Socialite because the Real Housewife of Innistrad is the only, I was going to say good, I'll downgrade that to playable Anthem effect that we have for vampires right now. You could play Death Priest of Merkle. I did not like that card. It's a 4-mana Anthem effect that's easy to remove, doesn't have the right creature type, and is bad in terms of stats versus the rate that you're paying for it. Didn't much care for that card, but this card is kind of good on rate alone. A 2-mana 2/2 with Menace. That's an important ability in this deck because we're trying to proc that. You know, if your opponent lost life this turn clause, especially on future socialites. We're trying to do this because the card works really, really well in multiples. And this keyword ability will help you do that a little bit by making the creature harder to block. So I like that. It's also 2 colors, and that matters for a card in the sideboard. We'll get to that a little bit later. But there's a lot of reasons to want to play this card. But again, it's good on rate alone. And since we have burn spells in this deck, this is an important line to remember. You can always hit your opponent with a burn spell and then play Socialite, grow your team before your combat step, which is often a really important line. We've also got 4 copies of Bloodthirsty Adversary in the deck. There were a total of 11 spells for this to cast out of your graveyard. So, especially late in the game, once you do get to that 5 or even 8 mana mark, you're going to have the spells in your yard, even though we play relatively few of them. You'll still almost certainly have spells in your yard to recast with this. We've got a bunch of burn spells in this deck, so even if you do have to pay 5 or even 8 mana for this in the late game, if the game's gone way longer than you expected to, this at least gives you a way to use your mana and cast 1 or 2 spells out of your yard and maybe finish your opponent off. It's great after a sweeper, your opponent hits that blood on the snow or whatever, brings a planeswalker back. And all you got to do on your next turn is pay 5 mana, bring this back, it comes in as a 3/3 haste, and you recast like a burn spell. That'll take out whatever planeswalker they put into play, or it'll just hit them in the face for the win. So really, really cool card here. It's a great top deck in the late game, and it's a serviceable 2-drop in the early. And once it's done its job, there are times when you can just sacrifice it to a Falcon Wrath Pitfighter, and you're like, totally fine with that. So, card does a lot of things in this deck, and I like cards like this that are decent on turn 2, but also give us something to do with our mana if the game drags out. But in any case, we're also playing 4 copies of Nighthawk Scavenger because, of course, we're playing... Yes, we're playing this card. This is an awesome little creature, man. It helps us win aggro battles by, gaining us a little bit of life here and there. The lifelink is super important on this because it can lead to these huge swings that your opponent can't block and, protects you from the crackback by gaining you so much life. And as the game goes on, it gets bigger and bigger. So I have really liked this card in this deck, even if double black is a little difficult to get sometimes. On turn 3, you'll scavenge it up so that you can cast this card. And by the way, when it has to get defensive, it can get defensive. If it needs to block a Goldspan Dragon or some other huge flyer, it can do that all game long, no matter how small it is. So just a sweet creature, again, on offense or on defense, depending on what the game looks like, and can often just be a closer. But the whole rest of the creatures in the deck, all of them are closers at this point, because we're also playing 4 copies of Emmerstorm Predator, another sweet thing to sack stuff too. Both vampires and dragons are individually terrifying, but when you put them together, they're one of the scariest things that a standard format has ever seen. I keep advocating for this card. You've heard me talk about it a million times if you're a fan of the channel. I think it's actually subtly one of the better cards in all of Standard right now, especially right now. Not only do all the points that I made about this card before rotation, before spoiler season hold, we lost a lot of playable exile removal and all that, so this card seems a little bit more playable, but a lot of the removal spells people are playing right now specifically don't hit this card so long as you have another creature in play. People are adding Fateful Absence and Infernal Grasp to their decks. Those are 2 of the most important new removal spells in all of Standard. They don't hit this. Vanishing Verse does not hit this. There's a lot of cards. That's supposed to be exile removal that could be an answer to this, but it's not. So this card just sticks around forever. And oh, by the way, did you know you can't sacrifice a bunch of creatures to it at once and make it really big? I think I made that mistake in the Mtg Massacre Deck Techs. So just to clear that up right now, in case you saw that. You can only, it taps and you put a counter on it. I knew that. I just get excited sometimes. But I made room for a couple of copies of Westgate Region up here at the top of our card. Even though it sounds like a hotel, where are you staying? I'm staying at the Westgate Region. The card's not super hospitable to opponents, though. If this thing gets through and once, it's kind of game over, because now they have to deal with like an 8/8 flyer. Then they have to deal with a 16/16 flyer if it doesn't kill them the next time. It just really takes over the game again, even if it gets through just once. But in the meantime, again, this will block Goldspan Dragons and other flying stuff. That's important. It'll block like Elite Spellbinders and not care to, so it'll just attack through Elite Spellbinders and not care too much. Just a pretty heavy threat that opponents have to worry about, and if they do want to take it out, it's going to cost them a little bit, and that is a higher price than you would think a lot of the time. War discard a card is maddening for a lot of people to have to deal with. But I saved the not quite best for last. Just no card in the deck is better than Emmerstorm Predator, but a vampire that I really liked that I didn't think I was going to love is Florian. This guy's been super impressive. I remember saying during spoiler season that maybe one of the best looking things about this card was the fact that it was a 3-power first strike. And it turns out that was super relevant. I was right for once. It turns out that this just beats in combat like most of the creatures the werewolves decks play. You know, Werewolf Pack Leader, the Ranger class token, Tovolar, Reckless Stormseeker beats all of the pants off of all of those wolves. They don't wear pants in the first place. Unless they're human. I hope they wear pants when they're human, but you know what I'm saying. Also, all the creatures in mono white, this just like attacks straight through without caring. So just in terms of stats and the keyword ability, this card is actually pretty impressive. Turns out 3-mana 3/3s with keyword abilities haven't been great lately, but First Strike, always a better ability than we give it credit for. So I want to gush about that for a second, but cool things about this card that I want to point out is that if you have a burn spell, much like some of the other vampires in the deck, if you have a burn spell, you don't even have to get through for combat damage. Like if you're late in the game, it's a stalemate or something. You don't have to attack, just hit your opponent for 2 or 3 with the burn spell, and then you'll draw the best out of the top 2 or 3 of your deck. And that's really good almost no matter what your position is. If you're behind, you need that gas. And if you're ahead, this isn't necessarily win more, because if this deck gets ahead, especially in this format right now where like, you might be ahead right now, but Eska's Chariot's coming up next, then Ren and 7, you won't be ahead for long. So this deck really fights to keep its position once it is ahead. And once you're able to, because you're ahead, deal 4 or 5 combat damage to an opponent during a turn, then drawing the best out of the top 5 cards of your library will help you stay ahead. So it's just been a wonderful card. But now we get to the spell suite, which was the hardest part of making this deck. I sweated so much over what spells we actually play. And honestly, let me zoom in the microscope a little bit, because it's not that I agonized over what spells to play. I agonized over whether or not to play Frostbite. And in the end, I think we do. It does mean some weird stuff for the mana base, because, you know, we want to play the Null Duel that we got. We already had a dual land. Neither one of them are snow, so we can't play all the snow duels in the world. But in the end, I found that even if it takes until turn 5 or 6, it's still really important to have a 1-mana instant speed removal spell like this that can take out Faceless Havens and a bunch of other creature lands like just that is important enough to play this card, but there's a ton of other reasons. I just listed off a bunch of 3 toughness creatures that the Werewolves deck play, not to mention a lot of other important 3 toughness and under creatures that a lot of decks are playing right now. It's a much more creature-oriented format at the moment. So a card like Frostbite is fan-freaking-tastic, especially compared with a card like Play with Fire, which I did end up playing 2 copies of. Don't get me wrong, it's still important to have burn spells like this to dome your opponent, activate or trigger Florian on your post-combat main phase. Trigger Vampire Socialite. These can go face. Burn spells are important. But you really miss the ability to deal 3 damage with Frostbite, again, even if it takes you until turn 4 or 5 to be able to turn that mode on. It's important enough in this format to do some weird stuff with your mana base. But even though we were on 3 copies of Frostbite, again, I'm still on 2 copies of Play with Fire, but I'm also on 4 copies of Royal Eruption. Now, Frostbite and Play with Fire are both instant speed, and that matters a great deal, but Royal Eruption is sorcery speed, which can suck, but we're an aggro deck, and most of the time we're not really holding up mana anyway, so I don't mind using this. Plus, if we're going to use it to, say, trigger Florian on our post-combat main phase, or we're going to use it with Vampire Socialite, right? It's our turn 4, we have 4 lands, we hit Royal Eruption, and then we cast Socialite to boost our team. We're going to do that again on our main phase anyway. It doesn't need to be instant speed. So I didn't necessarily mind so much. This card was a sorcery, and the fact that with Play with Fire, we have 6 different ways to dome opponents and either use that to finish the game entirely, or, recast it with a bloodthirsty adversary in the late game, hit them for 3 with the adversary, hit them for 3 with the Royal Eruption, finish the game that way. Or maybe late in the game you recast it with a bloodthirsty adversary and it boosts your team with a Vampire Socialite, right? There's a million reasons to want to play these burn spells in the deck. And one thing I like about this one in particular is that much like some of the other cards in the deck, Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter allows you to use your mana in the late game to draw cards. Bloodthirsty Adversary allows you to use your mana if the game goes late to recast stuff out of your yard. This, too, gives us kind of a mana sink. If the game goes way longer than we want it to, then we can either kill the huge dude that's blocking our whole team, or we can just finish the game by hitting the opponent for 5. So there's a lot of stuff in this deck that's kind of good on turn 2 or 3, but also great if the game goes long. And a lot of aggro decks don't have access to this many pieces that do that. Just a cool thing about Royal Eruption and a few other cards to point out. But we're also playing 2 copies of Infernal Grasp because we need to kill stuff that's bigger than 3 toughness. That's pretty much the reason that we're doing that. I mean, there's going to be times where, say, your opponent has a Renin 7 and you really want to kill that token badly, so you do that, right? So it's just an important thing to have access to kill stuff like Goldspan Dragon, and again, just creatures that are above all your other removal. And it's pretty nice to recast this with a Bloodthirsty Adversary. Anyway, let's look at the lands, and this is messy. It's a messy part of the deck, but it turns out it works out. We have a total of 15 snow sources in the deck, which is just enough to activate Faceless Haven late. And by the way, matters that Faceless Haven is effectively a vampire. It's all creature types. So sometimes you can sneak in some extra counters on this because of Vampire Socialite if you have the mana to do that. Or sometimes you can sacrifice it to a Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter if you want to be really sneaky. And you have all the mana in the world and you'd rather sack your Haven than your Pit Fighter. I don't know why you would do that, but there's been times where things like this have come up. So I do want to point out that Haven is a vampire and that matters. You know what else was tricky? The sideboard. But in the end, I think we got a pretty good one nailed down here. We're playing 3 copies of Duress to start off. This against control decks. And do remember, Bloodthirsty Adversary can recast this, along with a bunch of other stuff in the board, like Bloodchief's Thirst. If you want to recast this, you can. To great effect sometimes. This can take out like the token from Renin 7, or the Renin 7 itself, sometimes in the late game. So we need a little extra removal in the sideboard, and Bloodchief's Thirst has a lot of versatility on it, so I'm at least carrying 1 copy of this card. But we've also got Raise the Effigy. That's a weird one, right? But this can do a couple of things. It can take out Asika's Chariots, which is a very important thing. It's nice to have a 1-mana combat trick that can punch through a couple of damage, save a creature, blow out somebody on blocks. So I've really liked Raise the Effigy. I know it looks weird in the sideboard, but try this card out. Inscription of Ruin and Magic Missile are in here. These are both kind of silver bullet things that we can recast. With a bloodthirsty adversary, Magic Missile is great against sort of small ball aggro decks, like mono white goblins and stuff like that. Anybody that's trying to make a bunch of Clarion Spirit tokens. Magic Missile's pretty decent against, but it can also just hit your opponent for 3 to end the game, so that's nice. As far as Inscription of Ruin, you just always find something for this card to do. But finally, another one of the weirder looking cards in the sideboard is Moonveil Regent. I want to point out that this works kind of well when you cast a Vampire Socialite or an emmerstorm Predator. There's a couple of multicolored cards in this deck this works kind of interestingly with, but we need a way to draw cards, especially against control decks and other decks. Just kind of outvalue or outcard advantage us. Moonveil Regent is one of the best ways of drawing cards. We have Florian to do it, we have Pit Fighter to do it, but Moonveil Regent is especially good. We play a fair number of low impact cards in this deck that just aren't up to the power level of some of the other cards in Standard, let's be honest. So a card like Moonveil Regent that can help us draw more cards and commit more to the board state and all that is a very important card to have access to in certain matchups. Now, I haven't done this in a while, but I do feel like there were some cards I didn't end up playing that I probably should explain a little bit. I've already talked about Death Priest. And in the case of most of these cards, that's why I didn't play them, is they're just not good enough. I didn't like them. Like Falcon Wrath Perforator, Callous Blood Mage, Null Priest of Oblivion, which almost made the cut. I do like the idea of Null Priest for a little bit of, I guess, resilience in the late game. But ultimately, none of these cards were quite worth it. The same story with a Valentin, If we wanted another good one-drop for this deck, which we do, but hopefully we get that in Crimson Val, we could play Valentin, but it's just not quite there. The other half is literally non-existent in this deck. We can't cast the one that wants us to pay 2 green. But as a one-drop, again, it's got Menace, it's got Lifelink. Menace is good in this deck for a variety of reasons. And the actual text on the card that just exiles opponent's creatures when they die is actually decent too, and sometimes even gets us pests. So the card's not bad, but it's just, again, not quite there in the face of some of the other ways we can fill this card's slot. Same thing's true of Slaughter Specialist. Just wasn't a great card. I tried this and really wanted it to be fantastic, but too often I ran into the line where opponent just frostbites a specialist and keeps the 1/1. It sucks. Or they'll just go and Skyclave Apparition the specialist and keep the 1/1 and then start putting counters on the 1/1. Or like they Paladin class and they get the +1/+1 on the token that we gave them. There's a bunch of ways they can grow that token, actually. So it's a very dangerous card, and it wasn't anywhere near as good as I wanted it to be. It's RIP Slaughter Specialist. Same thing with Hungry for More, the last card I want to talk about here. I wanted this to be good, but it doesn't actually affect the board state long term, and it needs to. The best thing about this is that, like, after a sweeper or something, it can deal 3 damage to the opponent. But that's it. That's it. It's not as good as I want it to be. I want it to be effectively a 3-mana burn spell, or 3 damage burn spell with lifelink that you can cast twice for a cheap rate both times. And it's just not that. It just isn't. So I really wanted to like Hungry for More, but again, there's just way better 2-drop options for this deck. I'm not giving up on Hungry for More, though. I think in the right aggro deck, like the low to the ground enough, like Hungry for More might be decent, but this one, no, I don't. It's not good enough. You can like sacrifice the Hungry for More token to a Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter or something after combat, and that's a cool line, but it just, again, not good enough. But here's your power rankings. Final score of Nintendo 64, so maybe I shouldn't have said the deck has fangs. Again, after Crimson Vow, I think this deck gets a little bit better, but I don't think the deck is bad right now either. The deck has a lot of cool things going for it, a deck like, for instance, Mono White, another aggro deck that you might want to compare this to. Mono White and even Mono Green, which has ways of drawing cards, can't draw or see as many cards as this deck can. Again, you've got Pit Fighter, you've got Florian, and then in game 2 and 3, you might have Moonveil Regent. So this kind of has more ways of getting gas in the late game than a lot of aggro decks too. And, again, unlike a deck like Mono White, right, this deck has a ton of like would-be reach in the late game. Not the keyword ability, but the concept. Again, if you need to, the game has gone way too long, you've flooded out and drawn all of your mana, and the game's still going on somehow. Then again, top decking things like Royal Eruption or Bloodthirsty Adversary let you do some things that a lot of aggro decks can't do. Same thing goes of, you know, Agadeem's Awakening, or if you just are looking for a very specific card, you know, you've sighted in your Crippling Fear in game 2, and you need to get to it right now in the late game. Well, just sacrifice a guy to Falcon Wrath Pit Fighter, draw a couple of cards, try to get close to your Crippling Fear. So this deck, again, can do a lot of cool stuff in the mid, especially in late game, that a lot of aggro decks just aren't able to do. So it's a very different kind of aggro deck, and I respect that about it. But I do have one more thing to do before we get out of here, and that is a giveaway. Did you stay for the entire video? Congratulations. Now you might get some free stuff, because, you know, Wizards sent me some free stuff. It's amazing. They've actually done that twice in the last couple of months now. I don't know why I deserve that, but thanks, Wizards. You gave me some stuff. And this time around, they gave me some collector's boosters from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. They gave me some set boosters from Midnight Hunt. And they gave me a commander deck from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. And I was told, taught really, as a child, to share. But I'm given things to share things. So I don't do a whole lot of giveaways here on the channel, but I am a nice person, and we need subscribers. So, so what you want to do is, if you want this Coven Counters commander deck for absolutely free at no cost to you whatsoever, all you got to do is be subscribed and leave a comment down there in the section for that. And then I will pick a winner in like a week. After the video has been up a week, I'll pick a winner, and I will contact you. So just be looking for replies to your comments. 1 week after this video is posted, make sure you go back and look and see if there's a reply to your comment, because it might be me telling you that you won. So yeah, anyway, you want a free commander deck? I mean, I'd like it, but I don't need it. So if you want it, you can have it. Just be subscribed, leave a comment down there. But aside from that, just let me know. Leave a comment anyway. Let me know how you felt about the deck and all that stuff. You know, if you're going to leave a comment for the commander deck, that's a good guideline to do. Just tell me how you felt about this video and all that, and how you would have built the deck differently. All the normal stuff that you did. If I made a mistake, make sure you hit me in the face for it. That's what you like to do. But anyway, aside from that, like and subscribe, do all of this stuff. Again, we play Magic on Twitch. And if you want to really help support the channel, it's just $1 a month to vote on content on the patreon.com there. And you can also follow me on Twitter, mostly for dog and cat updates and news and stuff like that. But anyway, also, I don't know, shower thoughts, weird stuff. But anyway, that's it. So I guess I'm always really bad at ending videos. Terrible at it. But anyway, love you guys. I'm Dead from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind. Can you tell I don't actually script these? I come up with stuff, and like, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like, I had this whole thing where I was going to like get into like a coffin-like device to end the video, but that costs so much money. So instead, I'm just doing this awkward thing. Bleh, vampire jokes, bleh, bye. What am I doing? Bye.